Welcome to the Convinced God Moves podcast, where stories of struggle are met with hope. My name is Audra. Today, I'm awkward about the name to call my guest. Currently, he is called Pastor David. To many people, it's simply Dave. But the only title I use for him is my dad. I saw my parents last week. We went to visit a church that they've been pouring into. Shortly after visiting the church office, my dad learned that an older gentleman had fallen earlier that week. We zipped over to pay this man a visit. I was so struck with the reaction of the wife who answered my knock on her door. When she turned and saw my dad, her shoulders dropped, and it was as if she let out a huge sigh of relief. She immediately opened the door and said, "Come in." It's been several decades since I did ride-alongs with my dad as he made house calls. My biggest eye-opener last week was how extremely valuable it is to visit people face to face. I share all that to say, my dad is the real deal. Dad will share about the difficulties in being a pastor. His hope is this will get to the ear of a pastor who needs encouragement. My hope is it would encourage anyone feeling overwhelmed in jobs or volunteer commitments. If you're feeling stretched way beyond your comfort level, take a deep breath and welcome in some words of encouragement from one of the coolest guys I know.
I wanted to share a little bit about pastoring, some of the challenges of pastoring and some of the things that would help pastors in times of crisis or questioning their call, and an answer to prayer or two that came through my pastoring. I'll just give a little bit of background.
Okay.
I pastored bivocational churches for almost 18 years. I pastored a home church for a little over 2 years, and then church planted for 3 years. So altogether, about 22 years of pastoring. I was looking at some statistics recently, and it's interesting that half of the churches in the United States have bivocational pastors. So that's a fairly big number.
So bivocational means you have to have a second job, that it's not a sustainable income.
Right. You have to have a second job to take care of the bills, raise a family, make ends meet. A lot of people who have a second job have more than one, like they'll have 2 part-time jobs to make it work with their schedule.
So your statistic again is how many pastors are in that situation?
Half of the churches in America have
Wow.
pastors who have to work because they cannot pay a full-time pastoral salary. Another statistic that I thought was kind of interesting is that 250 pastors leave the pastorate a month in the United States. Some people have said that that's a low number, but I think in my research, and I've looked at several different sources, that's pretty accurate, 250. Only 1 out of 10 pastors actually stay in the pastorate long enough to retire from pastoring.
Wow, 10%.
Most of them are out of the pastorate doing other things by the time they retire, and that was my situation. I'd gotten out of pastoring. The last several years I did other work before retiring. Probably one of the biggest challenges, I started pastoring fairly young. I went to a Bible college when I was 22, and I started pastoring when I was 24. Kind of feel sorry for that first church, but...
Can't imagine. 24. And how many kids did you have at that point when you were 24?
We had 3 toddlers. We lived in a mobile home next to the church, and when the wind blew, the windows fell out. And they did. It was in northwest New Mexico, but it was a good experience.
What do we do about these pastors not making enough money? I just have to bring up the fact that you and Mom had to hustle big time. Yard work, driving school bus.
Yeah, driving school bus and doing yard work were 2 of the big ones through
a lot of years.
Part of that would be answered through God growing the church. In that first pastorate in New Mexico, the church did grow quite a bit, but it was youth where it grew. It grew from 3 young people to where we were often running 18 to 20 teenagers. A lot of times don't have the resources to support the church.
Yeah.
And so although we were seeing number growth, we weren't really seeing financial growth.
Yeah.
I think reaching the families and having the church grow and teaching through discipleship would maybe be part of the answer to that. Mm-hmm. In the denomination I'm associated with, they ordain pastors as elders. And at the last district, there were 11 people ordained as elders. Only 3 of them were men. Some people, listening may say, well, what justifies a woman pastor? Well, the first missionary was a woman in Jesus' time. The woman at the well, after Jesus talked to her, she went and told everyone about Jesus. If you use the word preach or proclaim, the first proclaimers of Jesus' resurrection were women. I don't think God has a problem with women preachers.
Yeah.
But I think part of the reason so few men are getting into the pastorate is because of finances. When I was checking out some statistics about pastoring, and there are a couple of resources. One is called Lifeway, and another one is called Pastoral Care. They said that 84% of pastors, when interviewed, and they interviewed, I believe, over 1,500 pastors, 84% said that they wish they had a close friend or a confidant. I struggled with that in a couple of pastoral situations, and I wish now, looking back, that I had made the effort, and it would take some effort to make that connection. I had a pastor, I wouldn't necessarily say he was a friend, but an associate who had a close friend that he would have get-togethers every Sunday night, he and his family. They would just kind of be themselves, play games, just have a casual time. And I think when things came up, they could talk about it because they were close and connected.
So that was somebody in their church.
It was actually a pastor from another church that he was meeting with and their family. A different denomination, but they had a good connection. So at this first church, as a young guy, not sure about pastoring and what the expectations were, I really struggled with kind of a feeling of loneliness for a while and about the church not growing, not much happening, although things were actually happening a little bit with the youth group. But I started praying and fasting, and on the 3rd day of a fast, a guy knocked on my door. I believe he was a relative, a cousin to somebody in the church. And this was a lot of years ago. So he said, I just felt like the Lord wanted me to come and talk to you about praying and fasting with you. And I hadn't told anyone that I was praying and fasting except for my wife. So that was really an encouragement, because he said, let's meet together, let's pray, let's make a commitment for a month. And then I think it went for 2 months. That was, the Lord coming through when he knew I needed some encouragement. Again, statistics show that 66% of pastors feel like they live in a fishbowl. People are always aware of what they're doing, where they're going, who they're seeing. And so that can be a little wearing, I guess. Another interesting statistic is that 38% of pastors deal with depression. I believe it's 46 to 48% of pastors, when they were interviewed, admitted that they were thinking about getting out of the pastorate.
Wow. And this is the same interview, like with 1,500 pastors.
Tough parts of pastoring, I think, focusing so much on ministry that you miss it with your family. In Mark 8, Jesus said, what's it going to profit you if you gain the whole world and you lose your own soul? I was really focused on church and church people and doing things at church and just getting really close to the point of burnout. And I read that verse, and that the Lord seemed to impress on me, what will it profit a man if he gains a growing church yet loses his own family?
So I'm a preacher's kid. I'm your kid. I always thought, yeah, we're doing church stuff, but we're doing it together, And you were really good at having fun with us and making time. But I'm sure you were exhausted.
Well, some of the things that we did together as a family were out of necessity. Because when we were in New Mexico in that mobile home, it got hot. There was a swamp cooler, but it didn't keep up with the heat. So we would take the family out to Navajo Reservoir and swim and play and
just to stay sane.
to cool down. Yeah. And a lot of times going or coming, it was about 18 miles out to the reservoir. We would pick up aluminum cans along the road and turn them in for cash.
Oh.
Do you remember doing that? You were pretty young.
Very vaguely. Yeah.
Parents came out one time and we did that.
Collect aluminum cans.
And my dad thought that was so great he wanted to go do it again.
And I just want to say, when we were really struggling, we thought it was a party night when we got to have hot chocolate and toast. It was cinnamon toast, and I think the hot chocolate was made out of powdered milk or something. And Mom has since said she felt really guilty. That was when you were out of money, but we saw it as great fun. Somehow, I think that's God's protection.
Well, I think, too, all Christians need to be aware of and open to when God moves in special ways. When we were doing that church plant, your mom was coming home from driving school bus, and she turned up our road, and a car hit her and pretty much totaled the car. And we were thinking, what are we going to do? Because we don't have money to go get a car. We don't have money to repair this one. It was actually beyond repair. She could barely drive it a half block. We were just at a loss of what we were going to do. The next day, the church office called and said, we've had a missionary here traveling around Oregon, and they're done with their travels. It was called deputation. They were raising money to go back to the mission field. And they're done with their car. Could you use it?
Wow.
And
the next day.
The next day.
What a gift.
And so we can use it. So we went to check it out, and it was the nicest car we've ever owned. I mean,
what color was it?
It was maroon. I think it was an Oldsmobile, and it had some features I didn't know cars even had. But I feel like that was definitely a God thing.
Yeah.
Meeting a need.
Can't deny. Yeah.
When we were in Bible college, we were just struggling to find, I think we had 2 toddlers, and we were struggling to find food. And we found something for breakfast, probably oatmeal. And we went to church saying, I don't know what we're going to do for lunch, because the cupboards were bare. But we didn't want to, say, help.
Yeah.
And we didn't say anything to anyone. But when we got home from church, there was probably 14
grocery bags.
Grocery bags.
Do you have any idea who delivered that? No.
I don't have a clue. Yeah.
What a gift.
I don't know how they would have known, But some of the most exciting things about pastoring was to get out of the organized church for a little while and church plant, and then to be involved in a home church in a bush village in Alaska, because in those situations, you don't have the established Christians with their background or their ideals. So in the church plant and in the home church, we had people who were not church background at all. So it made for some really interesting conversations, because in the home church in that Alaska village, I just started in Genesis and we started going through the Bible, and that was our study. And there was only one other Christian couple with that church background who came. About 15 to 18 people usually came, and we would have a potluck afterwards. Maybe 5 or 6 kids were there. People who had gone to church when they were kids, but they didn't realize that a poster their daughter had in their bedroom that said, God keeps his promises and has a rainbow. They didn't realize what that meant until we read the story of Noah. This second grade teacher said, so that's what the poster in my daughter's room means. And she was just dumbfounded. In the church plant we were working on, we had 2 cabinet maker brothers. Rex and Jurgen were their names. More than one Sunday, Jurgen would come into church and say, if I have to get up and go outside because I'm sick, it's not because of your preaching. It's because I partied too hard last night. And he would often wear a cap that had foul language on it, and then he would wear a T-shirt that says, praise the Lord anyway. They really grew in the Lord, though, and by the time we left, I got a report back from them after we left, and they were taking their breaks at this cabinet shop they were working at, and having a Bible study during their breaks. They were really growing spiritually. We were meeting in a cafeteria at a grade school, and I asked them once if they could build a portable altar, and they didn't have any idea what I was talking about. So they said, how many steps do you need for people to climb up on it and stand on it? And I said, well, it's to kneel at, and so it doesn't need any steps.
So they built that.
They did build a portable altar.
I wish I remembered that.
And it just folded up and was easy to put away, but yeah.
Wow.
There's an old hymn that I think pastors would be good to think about the words often. It says, rise up, O men of God, have done with lesser things. Give heart and soul and mind and strength to serve the King of Kings. 1 Peter 3 says, I think it's around verse 4 or 5. Peter says, place Christ as a center in your life, the center of your heart. Place Christ as Lord. There are a lot of distractions in pastoring. I mean, you can get involved in a lot of social work or visiting a nursing home or hospital and all that. But in the midst of that, it's important to keep Christ as Lord in our hearts and follow his leading. Sometimes he'll just say, you need to relax a little bit, or you need to take some time off.
I'm surprised you haven't talked about the issue of elder boards.
The administration, especially board meetings in a small church, were very challenging because money was always an issue. And then in an established church with the board, often when you have a vision and it's different than what they're used to or they want to do, it's a real struggle to get that going. You know, the 7 last words of the church, we've always done it this way before. So I think that was my biggest challenge with church elder or board meetings, was the issues of money. What are we going to pay? Are we going to pay the utilities, or are we going to pay the pastor? Yeah. And then there were the issues of having a vision but not really having people buy into it. And I think that's probably maybe my fault, the way it was presented. I might have tried to present it as, let's go do this now, instead of, taking baby steps to get to where we needed to go. I'm helping in an interim situation now with another pastor, and he calls himself the bad cop, and he calls me the good cop because he deals with all of the board issues. Yeah. And I deal with more of the relational stuff. So yeah. I've gone to some board meetings, but I don't mind missing them either. That was a challenge for me. And that was a nice thing about church planning and the home church, is we didn't have that
freedom
structure. Yeah.
And we got to give a shout out. Wasn't it Malala, that big church that had us come as guests, and they brought in armloads
Oh,
of...
that was the first church we were at in New Mexico.
Oh.
Yeah, they invited us on a Sunday night. Our car wasn't working to go. We had to go from northwest New Mexico, the corner, real close to Four Corners, down to Albuquerque. It was Albuquerque First Church. And they said, we'd like you to preach Sunday night. And so I preached about how big churches should support little churches. And I kind of railed on them a little bit. And then I was humbled afterward because
had so much.
they had people come with armloads of gifts, and they had contacted the church and asked what we could use in our home. They had lamps and all kinds of things, food to fill probably 3 pantries. And we had borrowed a Volkswagen Bug to go there.
I remember you unpacked the grocery bags and put canned goods just right next to each other.
And we had to go back to get the rest of it with another vehicle later on. Yeah, that was another time God really met a lot of needs with that church.
Mm-hmm. Good. So your charge of struggling and being a pastor is just hang on tight. Hang on tight to Jesus and his word.
Keep preaching the word in season and out of season. I had a professor when I was doing biblical studies that would say, if you're going to be a preacher, you've always got to be ready to preach, pray, or die. I think the important part of that preach part is preach the word. And even if it's hard for people to digest, preach the word. In Ezekiel, God gave Ezekiel a scroll, and he said, take and eat this. And he took and he ate it, and it says it was sweet in his mouth, even though the scroll was full of woes. And then in the Revelation, the scroll was given to John, and he was told to eat it. And it says that John ate the scroll, and it was sweet in his mouth, but it was bitter in his stomach. And when I read those, I think of God's word sometimes. Sometimes we can receive it, and it can be sweet, and we can digest it well. Other times it may bring conviction, and give us a upset stomach, so to speak. Be bitter in our stomach until we deal with maybe sin or a wrong attitude or something that we said that wasn't right, and confess that and get that straightened out between us and God, and then the word becomes rich and sweet and good again.
Yeah.
That would be my charge to pastors, is to find a friend. Don't feel like you need to do it all by yourself. You're not the Lone Ranger. Even the Lone Ranger had a sidekick, right? Find someone, and if you need to, talk to pastoral leadership. Whoever's above you in the hierarchy of the church, go to them if you're struggling and say, this is what I'm dealing with. What advice do you have? And
don't suffer alone.
Don't
Seek
suffer alone.
help.
Yeah. I really believe that that's part of the reason that so many pastors struggle with depression, is they're trying to do it on their own. That the Bible several places talks about 3-strand cord is better than one, and iron sharpening iron, and all of that. So if I could do it over again, that's something I would have really made the effort to do, is to find a friend that I could just be a good friend with, even if it was from another church, another denomination, or even a town close by, and someone who I could confide in when I was struggling, dealing with personal issues or issues in the church or whatever. Of those 250 pastors who leave the pastorate a month, it was interesting that over 70% of them were not leaving because of any moral or ethical issue. It was burnout. That's a pretty large percentage of that 250 that's burning out from the pastorate. Another statistic from those studies was that 84% of pastors felt like pastoring was a 24/7 job.
Never get a break.
Always had to be there. I went to a pastor's retreat early on in my pastoring, and there was a professor from a seminary there, and he said, "Do you take a day off?" He was asking pastors this. A lot of pastors said, "Yeah, we take a day off," or "I take 2 days off," or whatever. And somehow it came to me, and he said, "You take a day off?" And I said, "Yeah, I take a day off, and we usually try to get out of town, like go to a neighboring town or go on a drive." Or he said, "And what do you talk about when you go on those drives? You go to a neighboring town?" I said, "Well, we usually talk about church stuff."
Yeah.
And he said, "So you're not really taking a day off, are you?" That's kind of like what pastoring is. It's always on your heart and mind, so it's tough to get away. But I do know pastors who are good about taking retreats, whether it's just a couple of days or a long weekend or whatever, but just getting away and
you respect him for that.
yeah, having personal quiet time. That's a big help for the weight of that 24/7 kind of call. Yeah. I was asked recently, what makes a good pastor? I thought about that a minute, and I think there are a few things. One is not to take yourself too seriously. I think another one is to be very biblical, personally and in the pulpit. I was really guilty at that first pastorate of preaching more topical sermons than actually getting into the Word. And the Bible says that the Word is where it's at. You know, it will not return void, where a topic is not going to, no promise that won't return void. Another part of that, I believe, of a successful pastorate is personal prayer and prayer for the people in the church, prayer for the needs of the church. And then third thing I think that I've just actually am learning how true it is in a interim situation that I'm in now is the relational situation of really getting to know the people, connecting with them, finding out about their lives, taking an interest in them. If a pastor's really committed to prayer and to getting into the Word and proclaiming the Word, God's going to honor that. It might take time, might take years, but I believe God will honor that. God is always good. He always comes through. Sometimes we kind of get in his way, but if we'll let him, he will come through.
He will. All right. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thanks for letting me share.